The strange death of Europe centers on the 2015 migration crisis, which you all remember was the moment when Angela Merkel massively exacerbated an already existing problem by announcing unilaterally that the external and internal borders of Europe were basically dissolved. In a single act, the mass movement of people that had been going on for decades sped up exponentially, so that Germany in a single year took in an additional 2% of its population, that Sweden took in an additional almost 3% of its population. This is all part of a pattern, I say, that has been going on for many decades, and just like those previous decades, what happened after the 2015 crisis was that politicians and the media found excuses to justify something that would have happened anyway. So, for instance, German citizens and others were told that this mass migration, millions of people into Europe, would be a net economic gain for their society, that it would enrich their society. Now, actually, all of the studies that I've gone over in this show that, at best, most such migration cannot be called to be any kind of economic gain. A study in Britain showed that over a 15-year period, migrants took out 95 billion more in services than they put in taxation. And of course they would. If you go to another country, you don't speak the language, you don't have the skills, it's going to be a very long time before you've put in anything into the welfare system remotely like the amount that you and your family will have taken out. But this is one of the arguments that are made. And by the way, just as in all of the decades after the war, so in the post-2015 moment, the governments that came up with these explanations had to hedge around the facts, so that just like the Labour government after 1997, they had to pretend that the average migrant was a Luxembourgian hedge funder. And this is just one of the lies that gets told to the people. Because once that one is shot down, once, for instance, you notice that the number of people who've been added to Germany's welfare bill in the last year is almost exactly the number of the people who came in 2015. Once you go over that lie, you get to another one, which the German people and others were told, which is that we are an aging population, we are a greying population, and that therefore we need, obviously, to bring people in to keep us and our society into the standards to which we've become accustomed. Of course, this argument always ignores one extraordinary thing which none of the politicians ever seem to be able to recognize, which is the startling fact that migrants get old as well. It's amazingly enough, it's not just us Europeans who suffer the aging process. Who knew? But of course, if you do believe in that idea, that you need to keep on bringing people to keep yourself in the custom that you're now used to, you get what I describe as the pyramid problem in migration. You keep having to bring in more and more people all the time to keep yourselves in that sustainable societal moment. But so once you get the one of, well, okay, maybe they don't make us richer, maybe the aging population thing doesn't work, you get to another one, which is diversity. It doesn't matter if we're financially poorer. It doesn't matter because we're so much more culturally rich. Now, I should say that there is something in this. What society, Europeans certainly wouldn't do, is what society doesn't want to know as much of interest and culture as the world has to offer. Who doesn't want to know as much about the world and about the ideas of the world as possible? But, of course, the first person from, for instance, India to bring Indian cuisine into the UK does an interesting service, vimms up the local cuisine. It's not the case that the next 100 Indians who come in, for instance, bring 100 times more interesting cuisine. It's not the case that the first Sudanese poet who enters the UK massively brings interest to your country, and that the next 1,000 people from Sudan continue to just bring ever richer versions of the poetry of Sudan. And by the way, please don't ask me to name my favourite Sudanese poet. This is just a part of that lie. They also say, you also notice, by the way, that this is always a one-way street. Not once in my adult life have I heard anybody say that the thing that Eritrea needs most is an injection of Welshmen. that they just could do with some Welsh cooking or singing. Nobody says this. Nobody says, as Mark Stein and I were saying in the conversation recently, nobody says, the thing that the Somalis really need is a bit more Bach. I actually think it'd be nice for them if they had a bit more Bach, but nobody thinks that's an appropriate way to say it. But Europeans are told there's something hollow at our heart, as if we in Europe, the culture of Dante and Goethe and Bach, has some kind of diminishment, something hollow at its center that needs filling by the world. And then you get to another stage in this, which is, okay, maybe it doesn't make you richer. Maybe the aging population thing does fall apart. Maybe the diversity thing isn't all it's cracked up to be. Or, as I put it at one point in my book, maybe we have to just do an agreement this is a quid pro quo. We have a bit more gang rape and beheading than we used to have, but then there's a wider range of cuisines. So who's to... Life's all swings and roundabouts, so... but then you get to the last stage of that, which is the one that politicians now say and speak to us about, which is, okay, maybe none of these things are the case. Well, suck it up. This is globalization. This is going to happen anyway. This is a hell of a way to speak to the general public about their and their children's future. And it is only said, once again, to the peoples of Europe in this tone.
Firstly, Douglas Murray discusses the 2015 migration crisis, where Angela Merkel's decision to open Germany's borders significantly impacted Europe. Merkel's choice accelerated an already growing issue, with Germany absorbing 2% of its population in a single year, and Sweden nearly 3%. This rapid influx strained resources and social systems, leading to significant challenges in integration and public services. It is crucial to remember that large-scale migration has historical precedents, such as the post-World War II movements, which also caused immense social and economic stress. Murray points out the economic impact of migration, countering the claim by politicians and media that mass migration is an economic boon. He references a study from the United Kingdom showing that over 15 years, migrants utilized £95 billion more in services than they contributed in taxes. This highlights a critical disconnect between the projected economic benefits and the actual fiscal outcomes. Additional studies support Murray's perspective, including research by the Center for Immigration Studies in the United States, which found that immigrants cost American taxpayers $116 billion annually, further underscoring the economic burdens of large-scale migration. One of the common justifications for migration is the aging population in Europe, which proponents argue necessitates new immigrants to sustain the welfare system. Douglas Murray critiques this argument, aptly pointing out the pyramid problem: immigrants will also age, requiring an ever-increasing influx of new people to support the system. This is an unsustainable model. Historical demographic shifts, such as the baby boom post-World War II, illustrate the long-term strain on social services when population structures become heavily weighted toward older generations. The argument for cultural diversity is another point Douglas Murray tackles. While acknowledging that cultural diversity can enrich society, he argues that its benefits do not multiply endlessly with more immigrants from the same culture. The introduction of Indian cuisine, as Murray humorously notes, adds diversity, but subsequent waves do not exponentially increase this benefit. Supporting this, Robert Putnam's extensive study on social capital found that in the short term, immigration and diversity tend to reduce social solidarity and social capital. Social cohesion and unity are also at risk, according to Murray. Rapid and large-scale immigration can disrupt social cohesion, leading to fragmented societies. Europe has seen this in segregated communities where immigrants and native populations rarely interact, causing social tension. A 2018 report by the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights found significant levels of social exclusion and segregation among immigrant communities, which corroborates Murray's concerns. Economically, while a diverse workforce can bring fresh ideas, it can also lead to conflicts and communication barriers. Companies often need to invest heavily in training and team building to ensure effective collaboration among diverse teams. A McKinsey report highlighted that companies with more diverse workforces are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians, but this comes with an investment in managing diversity effectively. Douglas Murray also criticizes the one-way street of migration, where the expectation is that only Europe should diversify. He rightly questions why there is no reciprocal expectation for countries like Eritrea to embrace Welsh culture. This notion implies a deficiency in European culture that needs to be filled, which is a misguided and Eurocentric view. Historically, cultural exchanges have been mutual and enriching when balanced, as seen in the Silk Road's cultural and economic exchanges. Finally, Murray addresses the inevitability argument politicians make about globalization and migration. He finds this argument dismissive of genuine public concerns about the future. It is essential to recognize that globalization's impacts are not universally positive, and uncritical acceptance of mass migration overlooks the complex socioeconomic challenges it brings. The Brexit vote is a clear indicator of public sentiment against uncontrolled migration, highlighting the need for a balanced and honest discussion on this issue.